Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Diana Ska. President Donald Trump announced on Thursday that he is sending 5,000 U.S. troops to Poland, and he appeared to be reversing a move which he announced earlier last week to halt a U.S. Army brigade headed to the U.S. ally in Europe. My next guest to discuss this all is Andreas Umland, analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Andreas, so glad to have you here on TVP World. So now let me ask you this first. I mean, a lot of confusion has been soaring here in Poland. The decision to send this additional 5,000 troops, is this final? What do you think made Donald Trump change his mind?
What I hear is that it has a lot to do with Poland's new president, Nawrocki, and that these two presidents, Trump and Nawrocki, are getting along very well. And these sort of personal relations play now a big role in U.S. foreign policy. And that's why we have this back and forth and not a clear line in the overall American policy towards Eastern Europe, where it's difficult to detect a clear position from Washington.
So let me ask you, I mean, it's often said that, additional U.S. troops in Poland would be meant to actually deter Russia from potential aggression, right? I mean, even though we've been seeing more and more Russian aggression, but isn't this more, you would say, as symbolic than actually substantive from a military standpoint? And again, clearly the number isn't clear yet, right? I mean, we're talking about as an extra on top of what we have is, it's still not fully clear.
To me, neither, frankly. I haven't yet understood what that really will mean. Also, where these troops will come from. If there are indeed additional troops, maybe they will come from other European countries, then it wouldn't change that much in Europe. But anyway, this is a good sign, and for Poland it's good, and it's also good for Eastern Europe, even though the number is not that high. But it's not only symbolic. Any U.S. troops in Eastern Europe are in these times increasing the security in Eastern Europe. So whatever the reasons are for this decision, and even if it's based on personal sympathy between the two presidents, the result is certainly positive for Poland and Eastern Europe.
But let me ask you, do you think that the White House and Donald Trump has actually been a little too hasty in shifting responsibility onto NATO? I mean, he keeps talking about how, Europe should be responsible for its own security and not, be so much dependent of the United States. But do you think, can we look at it another way, that it's been too much?
Yes, I think this is going too fast. The problem is that the current situation has emerged over 80 years, and one should also remember that this is not some sort of European trick, that the Americans were tricked into this situation, that they have been providing security for Europe. This has been an American decision after World War II, and the Europeans have benefited from this greatly in many ways. And now we have this difficult situation that the US is suddenly withdrawing its support for the European NATO members, and even more so from partner countries like Ukraine. But the European countries are not yet ready to take over themselves the full responsibility, because they don't have the resources yet. The military-industrial complex, the armies, the technological development, this is all lagging behind. This is also our European fault, but still the process could be more smooth. And the US should understand that this is a situation that is also a result of Washington's former foreign policies and not some sort of European trick to get Americans being responsible for European security.
I mean, Andreas, you said so many important things right there. First, let me ask you this. What's in it for President Trump to be suddenly wanting this shift in reducing U.S. military forces in Europe? He clearly understands or doesn't understand the situation, right? And also, secondly, I'll ask you the second question right away. You did say that Europe is not ready right now. What's it going to take for Europe to be ready for any potential threat that might arise? And more clearly, we're talking about Russia here.
There are two trends, I would say, in American foreign policy. There is the isolationist trend of the current administration and the disinterest of Washington for Europe, and even partially the antipathy towards certain developments in Europe. And that is peculiar to this particular administration and is a big problem for the transatlantic relations. The other larger trend that has not so much to do with Trump is that American foreign policy is redirecting its focus towards the Pacific, towards Asia. And therefore, this withdrawal of support and also eventually of troops from Europe is something that would have also happened without Trump. The European countries are not ready for such a swift change in American foreign policy, and they will have to now invest a lot and invest quickly and to think about new solutions for how to provide European security. The European Commissioner for Defense, Andreas Umland, has just outlined a plan for a European Defense Union, a new organization that would increase European security and also include non-EU member countries like Ukraine, Norway, and Britain. But one could imagine many other new initiatives that would mostly also include Ukraine in order to compensate for this loss of American support for European security.
Andreas, how worried are NATO allies about Russia right now?
I guess that depends on the NATO country. The perception, unfortunately, is very different in the various countries. In Poland, in the Baltic countries, in Romania, I think the perception, and now also in Hungary, the perception is that of a serious threat. Whereas in other countries, there's a wide variety of views on Russia, partly based, of course, on geographical proximity or geographic distance from Russia, but also partly based on wrong, I would say, interpretations and a non-recognition that, unfortunately, Russia has remained an empire and Russia has remained imperialistic, although most other European imperial powers have become nation states and have gone away from their imperial past and from their imperialistic policies. Russia has not yet done so, and unfortunately that is not always understood, or is actually often not understood in Western Europe, especially, and across the world.
Do you think, though, regardless of everything you just said, that NATO is still united on key security issues at the moment?
Frankly, that is difficult to say because, of course, a lot depends here on what the position is of the White House, and to determine this position is difficult because it depends on the personal whims of President Trump. It also depends on who has influence on him. There is a faction within the White House that is clearly anti-European, or at least anti-EU, and that's why it's unclear how far the security guarantee that NATO provides is still functioning. My interpretation is that, at least concerning nuclear issues, the transatlantic alliance is still functioning, and I would hope that in a worst case scenario, this would then indeed be also the case. But concerning the conventional forms of security, I think now there is a rift, an increasing rift, and the European countries have to get their act together, either within NATO or within new organizations like the European Defence Union proposed by Commissioner Kubilius, or in both within NATO and outside NATO. The European countries have to more closely cooperate in providing for their security and defense, and to invest much more.
You did mention, Andreas, nuclear at one point. I want to ask you, where does Donald Trump right now lie with the situation with the war in Iran? I mean, we are apparently expecting some kind of a response on Sunday. What do you think is going to happen? And then with the Strait of Hormuz and the entire situation unfolding there?
This whole war, I think, is another illustration of the unclear position and unclear policy of the White House. I think it has been a bad decision because the strategy has apparently simply not been thought through, and one even suspects that simply the responsible experts for the region, for these kind of operations, have not been consulted before the war started. And that's why we have now this bizarre situation that suddenly Iran is basically pressuring the whole world with its control of this Strait of Hormuz. And the US is apparently unable to change that and is now asking the European partners which have not been consulted when the war started to take care of that. So I find it difficult to make any predictions right now because the Iranians have found a weak spot here in the Western alliance and are using that. And how this all will be resolved is, for me, still an enigma.
You think that he underestimated what Iran was able to do? I mean, I know you did mention his experts, right? That probably didn't advise Trump properly. And then what about the fact, how do you perceive Israel? Let's not forget about Israel, right? And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who apparently, I mean, many have said that actually pushed Donald Trump to go into this war. What do you think about that?
Yes, obviously, this is in Israel's interests, and I think Netanyahu has not done here anything unnatural. He is simply following his national interests, and as he understands this. But still, the US and also Israel, they should have thought about this more carefully, and especially so the US, because the US has the resources also, the intellectual resources, the experience to conduct such operations in an effective way. Something had to be done, perhaps, with this Iranian regime. It was and is a threat to the world around Iran. But this approach that Trump then has taken with this hasty war was obviously wrong and has now created this absurd situation that Iran can feel itself even as a winner in this war by pressuring the world with this limitation of access to the Persian Gulf.
Thank you so much, Andreas Umland, analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, for being my guest here on World Talks today and breaking down the most pressing issues. And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. I'll see you next time.